what prototype allows you to do is essentially create an instance of a function, right? It allows you to create an instance of the class, and that function gets instanced as well. A static class or static function like this is something where you just call it. You can't really create another instance of it. So, like in this case, we could call data manager.extract save contents from anywhere in any file, any plugin, and it's the same thing, right? Whereas if you're doing like a Windows selectable, there's a chance that that Windows selectable is a prototype of something else, or has been prototyped and is a different class name now. Like when we get into working with Windows, you'll see what I mean by creating an instance of a window selectable and then giving a new class name. Essentially, creating a new child class that is a child of Windows selectable, basically. So technically, this is what you would call a static function. It's just a function defined. There's no prototype. You can't create a new instance of data manager. It's always a specific thing. It's like a global class that can be accessed from anywhere, and you can't instance it. I mean, you could instance it, but you wouldn't want to, because the functions wouldn't work properly. And you'd be outside of the context of the game at that point, of the engine at that point. You'd have a different instance of data manager that is not tied to the engine, to the game you're running, and so it wouldn't actually have anything you could do anyway. It could be an interesting project to see what you can make it do when you do that, but again, I don't know why you would do that. It's not practical. But in this case, it's database loaded. So is database loaded equals, and then we're gonna have a okay, it's not a, there's no thing to, no parameter for this. So, we're going to put this inside of an if statement because what it's going to return is going to be a boolean. So, if the database has been loaded, it'll return a true. If it's not been loaded, it'll return a false. So, if not, tutorial plugin data manager is data loaded. Let's copy that down there. Dot call this. So if this is false, we're going to return false because things that call this this class, this function, are expecting a return of a true or false. So we need to return the false through our alias function as well. Otherwise, we just continue. So it's going to be like if it's false, we just stop. Otherwise, we'll skip by that if statement and continue on with what we're doing. We don't need an else in this case. Else then we want to process our note tags. So process note tags and return true. Okay, so that is all of the database data manager functions we're going to be aliasing. So now we're going to have our just general functions. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we need to handle all these ones we created up here. So get plugin database data. And what we're going to do with this is I'm just going to copy the code I have over here and we're going to modify it a little bit. And then we're going to get rid of this because we're not going to do anything with that. So we just essentially define these empty lists and then we assign those to these. I think we created those, didn't we? Oh, we didn't. Well, we should. I'm curious now if I actually name them the other way as well. Up in the other. Okay, no, those are the actual database names. The other ones are just the specific names we have here. Okay. Fine with that. So we have that. We are assigning those over into here, and that's fine because that's just what they are. They're all empty, so we're not really doing anything with them at the moment. Next one is going to be the process plugin database data. I think this one we decided to pass through contents to, right? Or no, that was load core data. Oh, load core data. We're missing that one. Let's do that one first. And then for this one, we're essentially going to have this. So tutorial core dot plugin data equals contents dot tutorial core dot plugin data. So plugin data, plugins. And we're essentially mapping the data back into the core plugin. Notetag data. And plugin database data. Okay. Then process plugin data. We're going to go ahead and pull this in again as that's a lot of code to type out. So essentially we're just going through and saying, you know, if there's any values within our data from the save file, any plugin database data, we're then essentially re-adding it back into through concat. So concatenate means add it on to the end of the game actors, game armor, you know, the particular database data. I wonder if this should be game actors or this should be data actors. That might be wrong. That might have to be. It might also depend just on the specific application I'm using it for in my plugin, core plugin. I'm gonna make this data actors just to keep it consistent, because I'm not sure. I'm probably using it specifically for something in mine that's on game actors and not data actors. So we'll just keep that to the database data for now. And you can see we're not using an else if because we want each of these to run sequentially. Like, all these should be checked. Like if we have data here, we should not check these. So we have to do specific if statements for all these that are not linked in any way. Again, this is all going to be empty, so it doesn't really matter at this point. And then we need to do the clear, which essentially is just reassigning all the values to be empty. So I'm just going to grab this and we'll put that in this new function, which is called clear plugin database data. Okay. So we have load data, we have process, we have clear. Now we need to do the process note tags. So this is where we're getting to the point where we're actually doing some of the magic here. This function process note tags. Okay. So first things first with this, we need to figure out what plugins we have installed, right? because we need to figure out what plugins we need to get data for. So we need to call a new function. We're going to call this detect installed plugins. And then we're going to have another function below that we're going to return a value from called get installed plugins. So first we're going to have plugin names as a variable equals get installed plugins, and then we're going to create those functions. So what this is going to do is it's going to modify our plugins, our the plugins object we have out there that had like the name and then if it's installed. What this is going to do is it's going to flip those installed properties to true if they're installed. And how we're going to do that is through a for of loop and a find. So what we're going to do is we're going to loop through the plugins global property, which is a part of the plugin manager. So we're going to say for let plugin of plugins, and then we're going to do a find. So let plugin data equal tutorial core dot core settings plugins. Is that in core settings? Yeah, core settings plugins. Then that's probably a bug. Unless there's a plugins. Let's see. Yeah, I think that I have I actually have a bug in my core plugin that got introduced when I decided to do this and change that. So what we have to do is up here, we need to change something really quick. This should be tutorial core settings.plugins. Oops. And likewise on the save, same thing here. That's actually a bug in my core plugin that I didn't know existed, so I'll have to fix that. Okay, so core settings dot plugins. Let's go back down. Blah 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 blah. Core blah 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 blah. Corrupted skills, process data, blah blah blah. Here we go. Detect install plugins. So we have our tutorial core settings plugins list. Now we're going to do a find on that. And we want to find where the plugin has the same name as the plugin from the plugins array, plugins list. So our plugin name, plugin dot name equals that could actually be, that might be a naming thing there. Let's call this plug, I guess. So plugin dot name, and where plugin status is true. So plugin dot status is whether or not the plugin is enabled in the plugin manager. So if plugin dot status is true, that means that the plugin is enabled. So first we check to see if the name matches, and if the name matches, we check to see if the status is set to true. Then if plugin data says that's true, then we say plugin data dot installed equals true, and that'll do it for every plugin of ours that we have installed that's in our list of the plugins that we have that are supported by the core plugin. And that's all you have to do for that. Now on the get install plugin names, we're going to do a actually, what this might be a reduce. Actually, you might be using that here. Okay, you're gonna learn how to use reduce as well. We're learning all kinds of stuff today that I wasn't anticipating you learning about. That's fine. So we talked about that a little bit earlier too. So function get installed plugins. So we're gonna have a list of plugin names. And what we're going to do is we're going to, actually we don't even have to do that, we just have to do a return. This is a little bit more advanced, so essentially what we're doing is we're going to return the reduction of a filter. Again, remember that reduce, when you use reduce on a filter or a find, it allows you to, actually, specifically I think it only works on filter, because it allows you to return. Well, I guess it depends on where you're using it. I guess you could use it on find, but you couldn't return a list of data. You can only do that from the filter. But on a find, you could return specific individual data from that individual record that you find with the find. In this case, we're going to use it on filter because we want to get all of the data. So we're going to loop over all the plugins that we have in our core setting.plugins, and then we're going to return just the name instead of a list with that. So here's how you do this. Again, this is going to be a little bit complex because reduces are always a little bit funky, but I'm going to try and explain it as best as possible. So the first thing we have to do though is we have to set up the filter. So let's go ahead and do that first. So tutorial core settings plugins filter, and then we want to say plugin again. We have this this validity confirmation here, this first one. So if there is a plugin object in our list that's null or undefined, we're going to skip it. You should just get in the habit of doing that because you'll have to do that for all the database objects. So it's just a good thing to get in the habit of doing. It's also good defensive programming as well. So the next thing we want to check is if it's installed. So plugin.install. Now, here's the next bit we have to do. You could do this on the same line, but I like to do it on another line just because it makes more sense and is more readable to me. So we're gonna hit enter. We're gonna do a tab over, and we're gonna put in .reduce. Now, so reduce is a function, and what we have to do with this is we have to create what's called a callback function. Essentially, a function that will run, that the reduce will run, and then return something from, and then be able to kind of build up a list using that. So we have to create a function inside of this. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a list as the first parameter. So we're going to have a names list as the first parameter. The second parameter is going to be plugin. It's going to be our iterator value from the filter, which is this. And then we're going to use the arrow notation, like that. And then we're going to put in some curly braces. Then at the bottom here, we're going to put a comma after that curly brace. And we're going to put in a list notation, so an empty list notation here. So opening and closing square bracket. That's just telling the reduce function that what it's returning is going to be a list, so it's going to look for that type of data. You can also use this to return an object, so you can do this as well. But we're returning a list, so we're going to do it this way. Now, what we have to do with here is we have to say names. So again, this is a list. So names.push, and then we're going to say plugin.name, and then we're going to return names. So what this is doing is we're taking our names list. We are pushing in the current plugin from the filter, the current filter plugin element's name into it, and then we're returning it. And it's going to return it to the callback function up here, which is then going to get called again. And we're essentially, this is the same as saying like in a for loop, doing a dot push and then doing the next loop iteration, then doing another push into it. It's just a lot different syntax. So essentially what we're doing here, to restate everything what this is doing, this function is being called, and it's returning a list of plugin names. And the way that we're getting that list is we're doing a filter over the plugin's property that's in core settings, which again, to re-show, has this stuff in it up here. Say list of objects. So we're iterating over that. The condition is that installed is true. So anything that was marked as installed from detect installed plugins is going to be pulled into this filter. Now, what we're doing on each loop of the filter, because a filter is essentially just another way to do a for loop, but for each loop of the filter, we're taking our plugin element that we're looking at, and we're passing it into a reduce function. Reduce allows us to take the data that we're looking at and return specific things from it that we need, not the entire object. So it's a way to get a reduced data set. So what we're doing with it is we're passing through, we're creating a callback function, so it's essentially like a recursive function, kind of. We're creating a names list, and we have our plugin elements from up here that we're passing into the function. And then we're essentially just taking the plugin name, we're pushing it into names, and then we're returning names so that it has the new value in it. And then we're doing that for every plugin that's in the filter list that matches the conditions. So then when we're done, when this whole process is done, what's going to happen is that we're going to return to the place that called get installed plugin. We're going to return a list of all the plugin names that are installed, that are marked as installed, which is over here. So in process note tags. So now that we have a list of all the plugins that we have that are installed, we can continue with the note tag handling. Because remember, we only want to handle the note tags that we have the plugins in the plugin manager for, and that they're turned on for. So that's what installed means, is that the plugin is present in the plugin manager and it's been turned on. If it's turned off, we don't want to do anything with it, because we shouldn't do anything with it at that point, because the developers has indicated that they don't want the plugin to load. So the plugin, nothing that the plugin would need should be parsed, and nothing that the plugin does should happen, because that plugin is technically turned off. So what we do now is, scroll up here. So what we do now is we call the individual functions that will process each type of data, and we pass through the plugin names list to that. And then that's going to be stored in our plugin note tag data object. So, for example, we're just going to do weapons because that's all we need right now. So tutorial for dot plugin note tag data dot weapon data equals, and we're going to call this process weapon note tags, and we're going to pass in plugin names. Okay, so let's go write this function now. Alright, so we got this defined. Let me add in, you don't really need the semicolons here. Don't really specifically need it, but it's just more, it's like proper syntax technically. It's not going to throw an error, but it's just, you know, that's just how it's supposed to look, you know. It's one of those visual things. In some languages, in some instances, you will have to have like a comma or something to indicate that there's another function after it, but in our case, for RPG Maker, you don't need that stuff. But you still should put a semicolon just because it's supposed to technically be there. Oh, I need to also make sure that's blocked off there too. Okay, so how this is going to work now is we're going to store we need to create a variable to store the data in that we're going to return. So let weapon note tag data equal an empty list. So then I think we need to have something to track the ID potentially. Trying to figure out what this null ID tracker is for. Oh, okay. So, yeah, we need a thing here to track whether or not it should be null. Because if there's no note tag data for a weapon or a database item, then that element in our data for the note tag data and the plugin should be null because there's nothing for that weapon or whatever there. So we do need to have that. So we're going to call this a null ID tracker. Okay, so first things first is we need to loop through the object, database object. So for let weapon of data weapons. So data weapons is the database data object for the engine. Then we need to see if it's a valid value. So if weapon is not null, because it can be null in some cases, and the first one will always be null. So once we have that, then we can set up the element in our weapon note tag data. So we're going to say weapon note tag data. We're going to say weapon.id equals an empty object. And then next up we need to see if we have any note tag data. So how we do this is there's a property on database objects called .note that has the note box data in it. So first we do a check to say if weapon.note is not undefined, and check to see if it's not, then also that it has values in it, that there's data in it. I did this a little bit differently in mine, but I'm actually rewriting it, 'cause technically this is a better way to do it than what I'm doing, the way I'm doing it in mine. So once we establish that we have that the note data is there, or that the note object, note property is there, not undefined, and that the data that's stored on that property is actual data, it's longer, the length of it is larger than 0. Then we can parse that data, because what that is right now, weapon note is a string. So it's an entire long string. Every line in the note is separated by what's called a carriage return and a new line character. Those are special characters that are used to essentially create a new line in text. So what we have to do is we have to split the string, the note string, into its constituent lines. So we have to create a list out of it, essentially. So what are we going to use? If you guessed split, you are right. So we're going to have a thing we're going to call let note data equal weapon.note.split. And then we're going to have it split on a regex string. Simple regex string now this time. So what I want to use is R and N. So carriage return and new line. And that's all we have to do. And then plus. So now the note tag data should be a list of all the note lines in the note that were in the note property. But just in case, we want to make sure note data has a value. So if note data and note data.length is greater than 0. Again, defensive programming, should always do it. Actually, get rid of that space between. Alright, now that we have reached here, we need to set up a couple new variables. So we need to have a way to tell when we've entered our plugin data's opening and closing tags. So what I like to do with my notepad data is surround it in tags that I have that are the opening and the closing, the start and the end tags, because then I can say, okay, out of all the stuff that's in the notepad box, this particular section of data is my data. If you don't do that, then you're going to end up parsing a lot of extra data, potentially causing errors, because other plugin devs might have attributes that are named the same as yours. But if you have them inside of an identifiable section, you can say, ignore everything else, this is all I need. I would highly recommend you do this because you're going to save other plugin developers time, money, effort, and a whole lot of pain trying to get your plugin to work with their stuff if they have to work around your note tag attribute names. Yanfly, notorious for not doing this. I actually don't think a lot of plugin developers do this, and more should, because it's just, you're being a courteous plugin developing neighbor, as opposed to dropping in a nuke and saying, oh, that's your problem to deal with now, haha, goodbye, and like walking off. Which is what happens when you just have all your stuff, spammed through the notepad box. So we need to set up two booleans. One that is essentially, we're going to say end plugin settings and end note tag reached. So end plugin settings means that you're in a plugin's block, and the end is when you reach the end note tag. Okay. And then we also want to set up some default values. So what you should do is, for every plugin that you have that has a particular attribute, you should set it to a default value, even if the plugin technically isn't installed, right? Because you're not going to be able to really tell. Well, I mean, I guess you could tell. Technically, no, we're gonna update this, how this works for the example here, as opposed to doing exactly what I did, because what I did was actually probably a little less efficient, because what I just did is I took every property I had from all my plugins, gave them a default value, even if the plugin wasn't being used. So it's still creating the data, albeit it's like zeros and stuff, so it's not really storing a lot of things, but it's still present, right? What we're going to do now is we're actually going to only define a default value for a variable, property that's actually in a plugin that's installed and turned on. So we'll save a little extra space. It's going to be tiny space, but still we're going to save it. And it may not be tiny space depending on how many properties there are. Like if you have a plugin that has 100 properties or more and a note tag data, and I don't know, if you have a plugin like that, good freaking luck. Nobody's going to use it because it'll be really complex, but if you somehow had something like that, or if you had a bunch of plugins that added like hundreds of properties to like a particular type of object, like to the class object or to the monster object, just because there's all these other plugins you have and they all do different things to that object, and you're instantiating default values even if the plugins are not installed, then you have all those properties that are stored in the data. So it's probably better to do it the way we're going to do it here. Yeah, okay. I don't think I haven't updated the class processor yet in my core plugin. Which is why I was like, this thing is missing something. So there should be something here extra here, and there was something missing. We have to have one more. We do one more for loop, and it has to go in between all the stuff we just wrote. So after you check if the note tag exists, but before you actually do the split, we need a couple different things. So, like, essentially, right here. So, first of all, we need to do a for let tag of plugin names. And then here we need to do another check, and we're going to check to see if the note tag data contains our plugin name, because the plugin name should be part of the note tag attribute. You know, the attribute tags that define the start and end points should have your plugin name in them. So if we can look at our data that we have and we see the plugin name, then we know that we have that plugin installed, and we can process that data. Interesting. So now I have questions. Okay. Oh, okay. Well, actually, why that? So I just detected a problem with my code. It's not really a problem. It's an efficiency thing where I'm taking the note tag, which has all the names and stuff with it, and then I'm splitting it to get the name out, and then recombining it into a certain thing. I don't need to do it the way I'm doing it here. So we're going to be making another update that's going to make this better as well. So technically, the version you're seeing here is going to be several times better than the one I actually have in my core plugin. So you get the updated version before I get to make it. So we have the plugin tag name there. We're gonna go looking for that. So we're gonna do we're gonna use something called includes. So if weapon.note.includes, and what includes does is essentially it searches a string or a list and sees if there's a value that matches it in there, and if it does, it's going to return a true. If it doesn't, it's going to return a false. And what we're going to do here is we're going to say includes tag, which is going to be our plugin name. So if it finds that in there somewhere, that'll return true, and then we're going to do the rest of this stuff. So only if it finds it, though. So get rid of that. Add that in, add this in. Okay, so now the next step of this is going to be that we need to set up the default values for our data. And how we're going to do that is we're going to look at the tag name, and we're going to essentially set up a if statement block here for each plugin and set up a default value for its parameters if it exists. So if tag equals, and this is going to be tutorial plugin 2 _ weapon bonuses. So this should match the plugin name you defined up above. And if we have it, then what we're going to do is we're going to say weapon note tag data, and this is going to be our different properties, right? So and I'm going to use the dot operator for these. In mine, I'm using the not the dot operator. I'm using a different. Actually, no, we have to use this because we're doing the ID as well. So what we can actually do is this to make this a bit more readable. So we have this, then we have to put in weapon.id because we're essentially creating the data for the weapon we're looking at, not just willy-nilly, right? So the ID has to match the ID from the database. So that the data can be matched up later on when we need it. So we're going to make this equal an object. Actually, we already did it up here. Never mind. We did this up here. So yeah, technically we don't. Yeah, okay. Actually, we're good. We are good. So we just do this now. Dot, and then we're going to say bonus. It's going to have to be uppercase because that's how the property in the... Well, actually, no, it doesn't have to be, does it? It doesn't have to match. We're going to do lowercase. So we're going to have uppercase coming from the note tag data, converting it to lowercase when we put it into the weapon note tag data. What is not right about this? The T is not right about this. So it's going to be bonus equals, and then we're going to put in just a 0.0. Weapon note tag data weapon ID dot bonus formula, That's just going to be an empty string. And then we need the ID, the weapon type, the skill type ID. So weapon, note, tag, data, weapon ID. Okay, and those are our defaults. And we'd have to have one of these if statement blocks for every plugin we're going to support. For now, we're just doing this, though. This one plugin. So, after that, we need to create a two more variables that will store the opening and closing tag. And essentially the way I did this is essentially it's like an HTML tag where you have angle brackets to define a thing, and then you have another copy of that with a backslash to close it off. So if you ever look at HTML, you have something like A, and then you have like this. Well, we're doing something similar with our tags, where we have our tag with our plugin name, and then we have the plugin name with a backslash in front of it to say that's the closing tag. So what we're going to do now is we're going to build those, though, based on the tag name that we have from the for loop. So let opening tag equal that plus tag plus closing angle bracket, and then let closing tag equal okay. Now, from here, what we have to do is we need to okay. Oh, we got a typo. Just noticed it. So from here now we need to loop through the note tag data. So we're looping through this. So for let note line of note data. And then we're going to do a switch here. This is like one of the few places you will use a switch in RPG Maker plugin coding. So we're going to do switch on note line. And then we're going to do case opening tag. And when we hit the opening tag, we're going to set in plugin settings equals true. And the reason we're going to do that is because we're going to use that in a conditional statement later on. Break, because we want to go to the next loop. So next is going to be case closing tag. And then we're going to say in plugin settings false. Alright, we need to leave in plugin settings true. Yeah, because we need to say that we're inside of the tag first. So that still stays true. So then we have to say end note tag reached equals true. And then break. Then what we're going to do is we're going to leverage the default, which again, so default, like we mentioned before, the default case is the case that runs when you don't have the particular value handled. So like if we don't have the opening note tag or the closing note tag, if it's something else other than these two particular specific values, it's going to use the default case to process it. So in this case, we're going to run all of our other code in the default. So first things first is we need to make sure we're inside of our plugin stuff. So in plugin settings is true, then we continue. And then what we need to do is we need to split the lines. So the way that I do all of my note tags attributes is that it has the name, a colon, and then the value. No spaces in between or anything, or if there's other values, then I handle those separately. Like if it's a delimiter or something like that, like a comma that's separating out various values within a single note tag attribute. So what I then do is I do on the note line, I do another split. So we go let note lines. Actually, it's called note line data. it makes more sense to call it note line data than note lines. We're gonna actually update all the stuff to make it actually the best version of this that it can be. So note line data equals note line dot split on the colon, and then so what should happen is you should have your name attribute, the name for the attribute, and then the value in a list here. So element 0 is always going to be the attribute name, and element 1 is always going to be the value for that attribute. And then depending on what you're doing with the value, you're going to process it differently. So in this case, we're going to say this first one is we're going to essentially go through an if, else if, else. Actually, I don't think I have an else. It's just if, else, if. And then we're going to handle each individual attribute property separately. So if note line data 0 equals bonus capital, because that's what it is in the note tag, or should be in the note tag. Then what we're going to do is we're going to say weapon note tag data weapon.id dot bonus equals parse float, and then we're going to say note line data 1. So we're going to take the value from the bonus, from the data line, and we're going to parse it into the value we need it to be. Technically, when you're doing this kind of parse, you would do a try around this, or have a function that we'd write that would make sure that this is getting converted properly, that the actual value you're getting back is a float. Is a decimal. Is there a parse decimal? I think a floating point number is a decimal technically, but let me look this up because now I have this question. JS parse decimal. Let's see. Let me go to JS for that really fast. So here's what I'm trying to figure out. So console.log parse float. But I think that's a string. Oh, it's a number. So it's a number, but it has decimal points. Okay. I guess that works. As long as it still captures the you know, the places. That's true, because technically 3, 4, well, whatever. Yeah, so it still works. There are some considerations that we'll have to deal with potentially when if we add something to it. We'll have to do like maybe a to fixed and then do another parse, like I have to do something like this: function parse float parse. And we take in a string value and then return parse float. And essentially we do something like this, right? So let's say we want to do so float parse 314 plus 2. Yeah, so we get that. And then what we do on this one though is we'd have dot So we'd have this inside of its own parentheses. Because we want to get .2 fixed. So what .2fixed allows you to do is, it allows you to set a precise number of decimals to round to, or to truncate to. And it returns a string, though. There we go, yeah. So you have to do something like that. So that's a little bit, so that's a quirk of, you know, parsing a float in JavaScript. Because technically, decimal is a thing, but it's, you know, it's a little bit hokey. So we'll have to do something like that. So that's something to keep in mind here, because we are going to probably be adding things to these. Let's see, time, got plenty. I have a hard stop at 1. Actually, a hard stop at 12, but we got another 30, 40 minutes here. Should be plenty enough time to get this done. Because the actual plugin is not going to be that big. This is going to be the bulk of it, and we're already almost done with it. Alright, so, in plugin, not is in plugin settings. Alright, so we take that, we do our thing here, so we're going to do a parse value on this, so, parse float. And then that'll be that. And so we're done with that. Else if note line data 0 equals bonus formula. And what this also allows us to do by putting the formula in the note tag is you can have the formula be unique per weapon as well, instead of having like a formula in the plugin setting where it becomes global. So it gives you more control over how the plugin works, right? Which is always something you should think about. Like if you, ideally you should always give the developer the most control with the plugin that you can give them. So what I would normally do here is I'd have these formulas that would be part of the weapon note tag, but then I would also have a default plugin level weapon plugin level bonus formula that would be used when the bonus formula was not present on the weapon, but the other stuff was, and use that instead of this, and this would override that if it existed. But we're not going to go that far on this one. That's what I would do personally if I was writing this plugin. Is to have that multi-stage so that you can have one that applies to all the weapons, and then override that particular global formula with your specific formula on a specific weapon if you needed to have it. And this one's just a string, so we just use note line data 1 here, and that's good to go. And then we have else if the skill type ID. Parse int allows you to parse a string into an integer, so we're going to use that here. Okay, and that's all of our code that we need to have for this here. So, next up we have to handle, let's put a break at the bottom here because that should end at that point. And then, at the bottom of the for loop, we need to check to see if we are at the end of our section of code for our plugin, or our end tag, and if we are in it. So if plugin settings, and if we've reached the end, then those conditions in place, we're going to do a break, because at this point we don't want to continue processing. Once we've reached the end of our current plugin's note tag data, we want to stop processing entirely on this element and continue to the next weapon. So processing over each plugin individually for each weapon in the note tag in the database, but it's happening all at the same time as opposed to loading in, then loading in, then loading in. So it should be faster overall. At the very least, you have everything in one place, so if you make any changes, you'll only have to come to the one place to change them, not to all these other places, right? So you get there's some refactoring bonus there as well, especially if you're using a plugin note tag attribute that is common across multiple plugins. If you ever change that note tag to some other name, you have to change it in all your plugins, right? Well, if you have that one, if all your plugins that are being, if all the plugin note tag data is being handled in your core plugin, you just have that one note tag in one place, and the plugins are referencing it. Sure, you'll need to change the name of the property and the data that you're accessing in your plugins, but you won't have to deal with changing all the note tag data processing. So it's a half solution to that. But still, it's what you can do, and what you can do is what you should do. If you can move something into, like, if you can refactor something into a single place, you should do it, even if you can't do everything that way. So yeah. So once we have that, we have to go down to the very end where we have the last check, I believe. Let's see, what check is this actually? Yeah, so the check for if this is valid or not. We need to put an else here. And if the element was null, then we have to throw in a blank element into our list here. So weapon note tag data, weapon ID. And actually, I would just say undefined. I actually put an empty object there, but I'm going to actually put an undefined because that's really what it should be. And then at the very bottom, we want to return it. So return weapon note tag data. And that's going to be all of the data that we have for all of our plugins that have stuff on weapons processed into our note tag data. And we're going to return that to our function, and that will be stored in the tutorial core plugin note tag data weapon data property. And at that point, we are done handling our note tag data. So let's move over to our plugin. Let's go ahead and save that. Since we're doing the core plugin on this one specifically, we're going to actually do the we're going to push this branch up, and then we're going to create a new branch for the actual plugin itself. So git commit am 001.1 core plugin coding git push setup stream uh, 001.1 dash core plugin. Okay, and we're going to create a new, so we're going to go check out working. And then we're going to create a branch from this called 001.2, and we're going to say plugin coding. And we'll go over to our plugin here. Alright, so for this, we're going to need to grab the header again. Okay. Now I want to actually go and open up one of my other plugins real quick, so I have a reference of how I actually set this up originally. Alright, so we have our stuff here, so we're just going to say tutorial, so core plugin, so I'm just going to leave this stuff here because that header stuff doesn't really matter that much. So the only param we need is the enable disable. So we're going to say enable weapon bonuses. So when enabled, calculates damage using weapon bonuses. So Boolean, default false, that's all we're going to add in. We're going to put in the help down here. We'll deal with that later. Alright, so now, the next thing we need to do now is we need to handle, essentially have to bring in the core plugin data. So what we're going to do is we're going to essentially redefine the var here. So tutorial core equals, now here's the important thing about this. We're going to essentially use the same variable name. We're going to put an or empty object. So essentially what this is saying is, if tutorial core has a value, then that's going to become our new tutorial core value, variable value here. Otherwise, we're going to set it to this empty object. This is just a thing that, like a defensive thing, so that if the core plugin doesn't load for some reason, or the developer doesn't have the core plugin installed, we don't throw errors and stuff. It'll still throw errors, but I'll be able to detect that and do so gracefully, potentially. Granted, I don't actually have that set up that way at the moment. Actually, yes I do. But it's not set up in a way I think that will actually work. Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe it would. It does throw the error, but then it continues processing. So we'll have to figure out some way to properly handle that. It's outside of the scope of the plugin, this video though. But you have to implement something probably on database load. Well, either a map load potentially in each plugin that would check to see if the tutorial core actually is defined or has values or something. And if not, stop doing what it's doing. Or if it's like processing something during database load, or after database load, do it then, so it doesn't do its stuff. But in this case, so we have this, and then we need to store. So we need to store the params from the plugin in our core plugin, and then we need to assign the values for those to it. So set up a const. Const is a variable that can't change its value. So this is going to be tutorial plugin 2. This is going to be the weapon bonuses. Weapon bonuses params. Kind of a weird name, but it's the plugin name, so you handle the plugin name and then the param, because you're going to store your parameters in here from the plugin manager. And that should match the file name. Alright, then what we're going to do with this is we're going to load that into our core plugin. So tutorial core dot plugin params equals this. And then we're going to oh wait, no, other way around. That stays out. We need to define our weapon bonuses. So we have our tutorial plugin params dot weapon bonuses. So this is going to be the parameters for weapon bonuses. That's going to be an object, and then we're going to store that as a global. We're essentially going to load that into a global variable, and it's going to be updated by reference, so we don't have to type out that whole string. So we're going to call this weapon bonus params equals tutorial core dot plugin params dot weapon bonuses. Okay. Now what we need to do is we need to essentially load up all the parameters into weapon bonus params. In this case, it's just one. But we do this essentially, so weapon bonus params dot is system enabled equals this. This is the parameter name, so it's this up here. Okay. So, and now we're using our tutorial core plugin to store our parameters, plugin setting parameters in it, so we can access them more easily and not have a particular variable, not a bunch of vars sitting out in global space that can be accessed from any other plugin to keep those encapsulated. So it's kind of a form of encapsulation. While you still can access these through the tutorial core, you have to have the tutorial core. You have to reference the tutorial core. If you don't know the property chain to get to where you need to go to, you won't be able to find that stuff, right? So, and if you don't know what the core variable name is, you can't get that either. So it's kind of a way to obfuscate it a little bit, and try and sort of hide stuff from players. Because technically, if a player can get into the console in your deployed game, they can use that to set all kinds of things. They can do all kinds of hacking of game variables and stuff. So the more you can kind of obfuscate it, the better. It also helps to keep it separated from other plugin data, so that is not your plugins. So it's always a good idea just to do this, in my opinion. Okay, so that's all set up. So now we have to handle our plugin commands. So just like we did before, we're going to be doing alias of the interpreter. We're going to be using regex to get the strings and stuff, and then we're going to be using that just to handle the one plugin command we're using, which is to enable and disable the system from inside the game. So var tutorial plugin weapon bonuses plugin interpreter, or game interpreter rather. Interpret. Is that right? It's a weird freaking name. Weird freaking word. Interpreter. Yes. Interpreter. That's the best way to think about it. Interpreter. And then we're going to say plugin command. Equals game interpreter. No, wait. Interpreter. I'm gonna say it's still spelled wrong. So game interpreter dot prototype, because this is prototype now, and then plugin command. Okay. And then we have this here down here equals function. Command and args. Okay. So if command equals, so this will be tutorial plugin dot weapon bonuses. Then we're going to have an argument string. For let So actually we could do this, again, we could do this a bit better, a little more readable than I'm doing it in mine, which is just do a let of. I'm using an iterative for loop. But I believe args is a list of strings. So we could just say let arg of args. And then say arg string plus equals space plus arg. And then down here, command plus equals arg string. Alright. Then, below that, if command.match. So now we're into our regex again. This command and match, so we're going to say tutorial. And we could actually use, we could just put the command here, technically. Like we could build this string based off of the command if we wanted to, but yeah. To each their own. Tutorial plugin. I tend to just do the string. It's just, you know. Bonuses. Then command is going to be enable system. Or what did we say it was going to be? Let's make sure we're following the enable weapon bonuses. And we're just going to handle zeros and ones on this. Or even, you know what we could do? We could just do this and call this toggle, right, instead of enable. And what'll happen is that whatever the state the parameter is in, so if it's true, we'll just turn it to false. If it's false, we'll turn it to true. The main problem with that is it's not so visible to the developer what's going on, right? Like if you can say set to true, set to false, you have a explicit value that you know you're setting it to. If you're just doing toggle, you don't necessarily know if it's on or off. You're just toggling it, hoping it's in a particular state. Actually, you know what? I'm going back on that. We're not going to do that. We're going to do the explicit name, explicit value. Just because I think it's better to do it that way. Alright, so we have our match there. If we do match it, then we want to do our command processing here. So, tutorial plugin dot weapon bonuses. Enable weapon bonuses. So like what you could do is you could build this, what you could do is this, right? Though, well, I was thinking maybe there'd be somebody to turn this into just a regular string, but you actually need to, you need to have the whole thing out because you're trying to match something, right? There's no way to really, I don't think, handle that cleanly with like just making this into a string. You have to have like all the commands have their own strings. I mean, it's possible you could do, you could like have like this essentially, like let's enable command equal this, right? And then you would have it like this. I mean, you could do that, I guess. It does look a little bit cleaner. Does this actually work, though, is another question. Let's find out. Where is JS Fiddle? No, it's down here. Let's actually find out if this works or not. So let's test equal Oh, it does work. Okay. It actually does work that way. Nice. So that's a little bit of, so here, okay, this is a little bit of a improvement here then over what I normally do. So you just set up all of your commands up here and then just use the particular variable that you store that regex in your both the things here. Now the reason why so let me show you what happens if we just do this match here, because maybe we can also maybe improve this a bit more on top of what we've already done. So okay, interesting. So it actually, okay. Here's an interesting thing then. Okay, so we can actually make this a bit more reduced as well. So we're actually making this more efficient here. So, right, because remember when we're doing the other way with the exec, it spits out the thing, and we're checking to see if the length is a certain length to know if we have more than just one parameter. So let's see what happens when we do this. Okay. So we have our test up here, we have our thing down here. Let's add in the extra bit here just because I want to have that in there for testing purposes right now. So we're going to have that. If it's greater than 2, console.log works, else console.log doesn't work. Oh, what do we got? Oh, should we test 2, not command? That's why. Works. Okay, cool. So now if we have something that doesn't match this, like... Yeah, okay. So, nice. Okay, so yeah, so what we can do now is we have our command that we're looking for, and then we can just set up the matches right away with this, and then if this has the length we're looking for, then we know it's good, and we can just do this. So this actually is a massive so it's a performance buff, right? Performance increase, because we're only calling match once now instead of twice. It's a readability enhancement because now the if statements aren't clogged up with all this regex. The regex is all going to be contained up here in single lines, so it'll be easier to read that way. And the matches it'll do each one of the things as a match, like it'll do the match, but it was going to do that anyway with the if statements, right? And we can still do an if-else if to stop when we reach the one that has the stuff in it. So this is actually a major improvement over my existing code that I'm using. So there you go. You're reaping more benefits out of this tutorial series before I could use it myself. So if that's there, then we're going to call toggle, or we're going to call change system status. And we'll pass through enable command matches 1. And then down here, and a utility functions. We're going to have our function change system status. Status, and then weapon bonus params dot is system enabled equals status. And you see how clean that looks now, as opposed to how we were doing it before. Now we also have to do one more thing, which is we have to have the else to handle the call for the. So if we don't have our command being passed through, we have to pass it through to the next thing, so that it still can work. And so we need to call the one up here with an apply. I think this is the answer, right? I think this is my answer. I think the core plugin, we'll have to go back and fix the core plugin. Because I'll do that later, because the this has to be, the things they're passing into apply are the actual parameter names, not just args. So that's actually a bug in my current core plugin too, which might explain why things aren't necessarily working right now. I was running into some weird issues, and that might be why. Good to know though. So I think that's all we really need for this.